Hello, and welcome back to Sonata She Wrote. Today we are examining a trio sonata of Italian composer Baldassare Galuppi. I first discovered this trio sonata on an LP from Nonesuch titled Trio Sonatas of the Late Baroque, which is the recording I'll be using in this video. Galuppi, who lived from 1706 to 1785, is probably more accurately called a galant composer than either Baroque or classical, but his career spans all three eras, and, even rarer, he managed to find success in all three eras. Born near Venice, the young Galuppi was known as a composer of opera and sacred music. He held positions as a theater harpsichordist in Florence, a freelance opera composer, maestro di cappella at St. Mark's, and as director of music at Ospedale dei Mendicanti in Venice, a kind of orphanage financed by Venetian merchants. In his middle and late years, Galuppi enjoyed a successful career and was well known all over Europe, taking temporary posts in England and Russia under Catherine the Great. He returned to Venice permanently in 1768 and held the post of maestro di cappella at St. Mark's until his retirement in 1776. Even so, he continued to compose until the 2-month illness which finally took his life in 1785. After his death, like many of his contemporaries, Galuppi was largely forgotten, but he has had a small renaissance in recent years, mainly because of his keyboard sonatas, through which one can trace a line of development through the Baroque to the classical period. The work at hand is unfortunately not dated, but is likely from a period before the early classical, as it includes a basso continuo section. A continuo unit, typically a harpsichord and a single-voiced bass instrument, frequently cello but occasionally bassoon, was a feature of nearly all music in the Baroque period, but it slowly faded in the classical period and was mostly found in choral or opera music before disappearing almost entirely in the 1800s. The score for this piece was difficult to track down, but I managed to get a copy through interlibrary loan, which, unfortunately, has some markings on it that I hope you'll ignore. But without further ado, let's get a little theoretical. This theme has all the angularity and energy of a Baroque melody and is followed by sequences and imitative writing in the harpsichord. But I can assure you, this is not a prototypical sonata form, indicating we really are past the Baroque era. There isn't anything too unusual about the primary theme, but I want to point out this sixth chord, only unusual in that it isn't really prepared by anything and to my ear does stick out a bit, and also this deferred half cadence that is thwarted by the oboe rushing ahead to this perfect cadence here. Once the oboe has managed to cadence, however, we're left treading water for a few measures. This figure here is one of my favorite parts of the sonata. It almost sounds as if the oboe is calling around looking for the flute to enter. It's your turn! The transition could be labeled as starting here, but I've chosen to start it where the oboe enters with the primary theme, locked into the dominant key of D major. Interestingly, the primary theme and the medial caesuras cadences both happen on the weaker beat of 3 as opposed to beat 1, which has the effect of throwing the hypermeter off kilter. After the medial caesura, the flute takes up this same conversational figure, but rather than asking the oboe to enter, this time the flute seems to be asking, what can we do next? The secondary theme that enters is not at all the singing style of Beethoven or Schubert, but is more closely related to Haydn's motivic style of secondary theme, energetically searching around for the opportunity to cadence. But of course, this piece was likely written around Haydn's own birth, so Galuppi and several other Italian masters influenced Haydn, not vice versa. A somewhat discursive secondary theme manages to cadence perfectly, and even corrects the earlier mistakes of the primary theme and caesura by doing so on beat 1. This closing zone could be interpreted as S aftermath, it's only a repeat of the final bars of S, or we might consider this sonata as not having a closing theme, which is generally optional anyway. The upcoming development is where Galuppi really shines. He sets up a rotation which will continually keep you guessing not only about which sonata type this is, but also where the recapitulation begins. Although harmonically rather simple, as was fashionable in this transitional period, Galuppi maintains interest by cycling quickly through different keys. In the space of less than 12 bars, he modulates through a total of 4: D major, G major, C major, and finally E minor, the global 6. A typical key for the development, what's highly unusual is that it appears that this key is where the recapitulation starts. Let's backtrack a bit and see how we got here. When I initially analyzed this piece, I first suspected a type 2 sonata, one where the second rotation includes a developmental section and a tonal closure. But this figure here, first calling for the secondary theme and then manifesting it into existence, really threw a wrench in that plan. The only option for the recapitulation then became this section in E minor, the global 6. This is not impossible, but it is highly deformational. So deformational that it had me reconsider the Type 2 sonata. But, as I said, a fully rotational development, which includes both P and S, really excludes that option. You may recall in Schubert's Piano Trio, Opus 99, a similar move in the recapitulation, which was written roughly 75 years later, where Schubert opened that section in the flattened 6 and then moved into the tonic. Although not flattened, Galuppi does the same here. After 2 bars in E minor, we move right back into G major. We'll listen to the full recapitulation now, and you can decide whether this section in G major actually seems a more likely candidate for the recapitulation. My issue with it is that it occurs as part of a chain of sequences set off by the E minor theme. So it's like beginning the recap in the middle of a theme, rather than the beginning of a theme. than separate the primary theme and transition areas, I would say Galuppi has compressed this area into a P-TR merger. But what we're missing from the recap is the conversational call motif from between themes that we heard in the exposition. The problem posed by that section seems to have been solved. Cadences now uniformly occur on the strong beat 1. The flute and oboe both appear together, rather than in separate solo entrances. This problem was solved by friendship. The secondary theme, now slightly compressed, easily finds the cadence here, and the movement ends. This piece is, in my opinion, very charming, and I think an excellent illustration of how complex, and dare I say, fun, the sonata forms that occur outside of a German tradition often are. Honestly, further analysis is needed to even know whether what Galuppi is doing here is deformational. Perhaps a blurring of lines between type 2 and type 3, or a recapitulation in the minor 6, are not unusual for Venetian sonata forms. I expect Galuppi, in the form of his keyboard sonatas, will be making a reappearance on the channel. If you enjoyed this analysis, please like, comment, and subscribe, or consider joining my Patreon.